November 10th, 2000. The year when dial-up internet still screeched through phone lines, when answering machines clicked with mechanical precision, and when a single phone call could vanish into static, taking someone's life with it. Elmwood Park, Illinois, sat quietly on the northwest edge of Cook County, a working-class suburb where ranch houses lined streets named after presidents and trees. Strip malls anchored each corner, their neon signs buzzing against the gray November sky. It was the kind of place where neighbors still knew each other's cars, where the evening news played on kitchen radios while dinner cooked, and where a young woman could disappear between one phone call and the next. Rachel Dunham had always been punctual. At 25, she carried herself with the organized efficiency of someone who had learned early that reliability mattered. Her colleagues at Riverside Medical Associates knew her as the assistant who arrived 15 minutes early, who never forgot to refill the coffee pot, and who could calm the most anxious patients with her steady voice and genuine smile. That Friday evening, Rachel's shift ended at 8:30. The medical office had been busier than usual flu season, settling over the Chicago suburbs like a familiar blanket, filling waiting rooms with coughing children and worried parents. Dr. Harrison had stayed late to catch up on charts, and Rachel had volunteered to help organize the filing cabinets that had grown chaotic during the week. "You don't have to stay," Dr. Harrison had told her around 8:15, looking up from his paperwork. "I can finish this up." Rachel had smiled, the same patient smile she gave everyone. "It's fine, Dr. Harrison. Lisa's working the dinner shift at Romano's anyway. I'd just be sitting at home watching Wheel of Fortune." The doctor had nodded, returning to his notes. The office grew quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of traffic on North Avenue. Rachel worked methodically, sorting patient files by date, her movements precise and purposeful. She wore her usual Friday outfit: dark slacks, a cream-colored sweater, and the small silver earrings her mother had given her for Christmas. At 8:45, she locked the filing cabinets and gathered her purse, a worn leather bag that had belonged to her grandmother. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Just her blue 1997 Toyota Camry and Dr. Harrison's silver Buick, parked under the pale glow of security lights. November air bit at her cheeks as she walked to her car, keys already in hand. The drive home should have taken 20 minutes. Rachel's apartment on Diversey Avenue was a straight shot through familiar neighborhoods, past the Jeweler Sco, where she bought groceries every Sunday, past the Shell station, where she filled up every Tuesday morning before work. She knew every stoplight, every speed bump, every place where teenagers liked to park and talk. But that night, something changed her route. At 9:47 p.m., Rachel's voice came through the static of her roommate's answering machine. Lisa Cooper had been wiping down tables at Romano's Italian restaurant when the phone rang in their small two-bedroom apartment. The machine clicked on after 4 rings, its red light blinking in the empty living room. "Hi, you've reached Lisa and Rachel. We're probably out having more fun than you, so leave a message and we'll call you back." Beep. Then Rachel's voice, strained and urgent in a way Lisa had never heard before. "Lisa, it's me. I'm on my way home, but something's wrong with the car. I think I took a wrong turn somewhere. There's a man." Static. A sharp electronic screech. Then silence. The machine's display showed the call had lasted 18 seconds. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. The caller ID showed only payphone route 64. When Lisa returned home at 11:30, her server apron still smelling of garlic and parmesan, she found the blinking red light and played the message 3 times, her stomach growing colder with each repetition. Rachel's voice carried something she'd never heard before, just concern, but genuine fear. Lisa tried calling Rachel's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She called again and again. By midnight, she was pacing their small living room, cordless phone in hand, debating whether to call the police or wait until morning. Rachel was responsible, careful, always called if she was going to be late. She would never just disappear. At 12:15 a.m., Lisa called 911. The dispatcher, a woman named Janet Morrison who had been taking emergency calls for 8 years, asked the standard questions. How long had Rachel been missing? Had she seemed upset or troubled recently? Did she have any reason to leave, voluntarily? No, Lisa insisted, her voice growing sharper with each question. You don't understand. Rachel doesn't just not come home. She calls if she's going to be 5 minutes late from the grocery store. And that message, something was wrong, really wrong. Officer Michael Torres arrived at the apartment at 12 m. a 28-year-old patrol officer who had joined the Elmwood Park Police Department 3 years earlier. He was thorough, but skeptical. Most missing person reports in the suburbs involved teenagers sneaking out or adults having relationship problems. Young women didn't just vanish from phone calls. But when Lisa played the answering machine message, Torres felt the hair on his arms stand up. There was something in Rachel's voice, something that made him reach for his radio immediately. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need to report a possible missing person, and I'm going to need backup for a search. We have a last known location of Route 64, somewhere near a payphone." By 1:30 a.m., 3 patrol cars were slowly cruising Route 64, their spotlights sweeping both sides of the rural highway. The road stretched through Cook County's western edge, past farmland that was slowly being carved up for new subdivision, past truck stops that had seen better days, and past the abandoned Sinclair station that local teenagers used for drinking parties. Route 64 in November was particularly desolate. The corn had been harvested months ago, leaving stubbled fields under a cloudy sky. Streetlights were sparse, creating pools of yellow light every quarter mile. Between them, darkness settled, thick and complete. At 2:15 a.m., Officer Sarah Chen spotted something in her patrol car's headlights, 2 miles east of the payphone location, just past mile marker 112. A blue car sat on the shoulder, with its hazard lights blinking weakly. "I've got a vehicle," she radioed, pulling behind the Toyota. Illinois plates matched the missing person report. The Camry's driver door hung open like a question mark. The keys dangled from the ignition, and the headlights cast pale beams across the empty asphalt. The radio played softly a late-night talk show about conspiracy theories and government cover-ups. Rachel's purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet intact, $37 in cash, undisturbed. But Rachel was gone. Officer Chen walked a careful circle round the vehicle, her flashlight revealing details that would later be catalogued as evidence. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no blood. The car's engine was still warm, suggesting it had been running until recently. Tire tracks in the soft shoulder showed the Toyota had pulled over deliberately, not been forced off the road. On the dashboard, Rachel's cell phone showed 3 missed calls from Lisa, all after 9:47 p.m. The phone's battery was nearly dead, its small screen fading in and out. By 3 a.m., the scene was crawling with investigators. Detective Janet Walsh, a 15-year veteran of the Cook County Sheriff's Department, had been called in to coordinate the search. She stood next to Rachel's abandoned car, watching crime scene technicians photograph every angle, dust for fingerprints that wouldn't be found, and collect trace evidence that would lead nowhere. "What do you think happened here?" Officer Torres asked, joining Detective Walsh beside the Camry. Walsh studied the scene with tired eyes. She had worked dozens of missing person cases, and most ended with simple explanations: voluntary disappearance, family disputes, mental health episodes. But something about this felt different. The car positioned just so, the door left open, the call that ended in static. "I think," Walsh said slowly, "someone wanted us to find the car exactly like this." As dawn broke over Route 64, the search expanded. Volunteers from Elmwood Park arrived with coffee and determination, organizing into groups that would spend the next 3 days combing through drainage ditches, abandoned buildings, and wooded areas. Helicopters circled overhead, their cameras scanning empty fields and forgotten corners of suburban Illinois. But they found nothing. No trace of Rachel Dunham beyond her abandoned Toyota and that 18-second phone call that ended in electronic screams. The last anyone saw of Rachel, she had been leaving the medical office at 8:50 p.m., walking purposefully to her car, with her grandmother's leather purse over her shoulder. Less than an hour later, she had vanished somewhere between a payphone and mile marker 112, leaving behind only her voice on an answering machine and questions that would echo for 22 years. In the weeks that followed, investigators would discover that the payphone Rachel had used was located outside Jerry's 24-hour diner, a truck stop that served coffee and pie to long-haul drivers and insomniacs. The phone booth, with its scratched glass and graffitied walls, sat in a pool of fluorescent light next to the diner's parking lot. Jerry Hendricks, the night manager, remembered that Friday evening clearly. Phone rang around 9:45, he would tell detectives. Saw someone in the booth, but couldn't tell if it was a man or woman. Busy night, you know. Lot of trucks coming through. The security camera outside Jerry's diner had been broken for 3 months. The parking lot lights cast long shadows that made identification impossible. And by the time investigators arrived to interview witnesses, the pavement had been washed clean by weekend rain, erasing any footprints or tire marks that might have told Rachel's story. What remained was the mystery of those lost 57 minutes between Rachel leaving work and making her final phone call. 57 minutes, during which a reliable young woman had somehow ended up 12 miles from her usual route, standing in a truck stop phone booth, scared enough to call for help. 57 minutes that would haunt investigators for decades to come. The first week after Rachel's disappearance felt like holding your breath underwater. Every phone call might bring news. Every knock at the door could change everything. Lisa Cooper found herself jumping at sounds that had never bothered her before, the refrigerator humming to life, footsteps in the hallway above their apartment, the morning paper hitting the front door. Detective Janet Walsh had seen this pattern before. The initial surge of energy, volunteers organizing search parties, media attention focusing like a spotlight. Then, gradually, the slow fade as days turned to weeks and hope transformed into something harder to maintain. The Elmwood Park Police Department had never handled a case quite like Rachel's. Missing teenagers, yes. Domestic disputes that escalated, certainly. But a responsible young woman vanishing from a phone call. Detective Walsh found herself studying the evidence board she'd assembled in the department's small conference room. Colored string connecting photographs, witness statements, and timeline markers that seemed to lead nowhere. Rachel's parents, Harold and Margaret Dunham, drove up from Springfield the day after their daughter disappeared. Harold was a retired postal worker, methodical and quiet, while Margaret taught 3rd grade at a local elementary school. They were the kind of people who kept family photos in neat albums, who never missed church on Sunday, and who had raised their children to call home every weekend. She always calls on Sunday mornings, Margaret told Detective Walsh during their first interview. Every Sunday at 10 a.m., right after she reads the paper. She's done it since she moved to Chicago for college. 8 years, every single Sunday. The Dunhams rented a room at the Budget Inn on North Avenue, refusing to leave Elmwood Park until they had answered. Every morning, Harold would arrive at the police station with a thermos of coffee and ask for updates. Every evening, Margaret would walk the neighborhoods around Rachel's apartment, showing her daughter's photograph to anyone who would look. The photograph they used was from Rachel's 24th birthday party, her smile genuine and relaxed, brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the blue sweater that had become her favorite. It was the image that would appear on missing person flyers stapled to telephone poles throughout Cook County, the face that local news anchors would display behind their shoulders during evening broadcasts. Channel 7 News picked up the story first. Reporter Amanda Chen, no relation to Officer Sarah Chen, interviewed Lisa outside their apartment building, the November wind whipping her blonde hair as she struggled to find words that could capture her roommate's reliability, her kindness, her complete inability to simply vanish. "Rachel is the person who reminds you to call your mum," Lisa said, her voice breaking slightly. "She's the one who waters your plants when you're out of town. She doesn't disappear. She doesn't leave people wondering." The story aired during the Wednesday evening broadcast, sandwiched between a report on Chicago Bears training camp and a piece about holiday shopping predictions. Rachel's disappearance received 90 seconds of airtime and generated exactly 7 phone calls to the police tip line. 3 calls were from psychics offering their services. One was from a man in Wisconsin who claimed to have seen Rachel at a gas station, though the timing was impossible. Another caller insisted that aliens were responsible, citing increased UFO activity near O'Hare Airport. The remaining 2 calls provided nothing useful. Detective Walsh had requested help from the Illinois State Police, bringing in additional resources for the search. Officer Michael Torres found himself driving Route 64 every day, sometimes twice, studying the landscape for any detail they might have missed. The payphone outside Jerry's Diner became a kind of shrine, with flowers and teddy bears accumulating beneath it as word of Rachel's disappearance spread through the community. But Route 64 kept its secrets. The highway stretched through a landscape caught between rural past and suburban future. Old farmhouses sat next to new housing developments. Abandoned gas stations crumbled beside shiny convenience stores. It was the kind of place where someone could disappear into the gaps between old and new, between known and forgotten. Jerry Hendricks, the night manager at the 24-hour diner, became an unlikely expert on the case. He had worked the overnight shift for 6 years, serving coffee to truck drivers and pie to insomniacs, watching the slow parade of late-night travelers who moved through his little corner of Illinois. After Rachel's disappearance, he paid closer attention to the payphone outside, noting every call, every visitor. "You start to notice patterns," Jerry told Detective Walsh during one of her regular visits. "Same truckers come through every Tuesday. Same guy stops for coffee at 2 a.m. every Friday." But that night, Rachel called. Nothing seemed unusual, just another quiet November evening, until it wasn't. The phone booth itself became a point of fascination for investigators. Illinois. Bell provided detailed records showing that the phone had been used 43 times in the month before Rachel's call. Most were brief truck drivers checking in with dispatch, travelers calling for directions, teenagers making prank calls. None of the other callers had disappeared. Dr. Harrison from Riverside Medical Associates found himself questioning every detail of that Friday evening. Had Rachel seemed nervous when she stayed late? Had anyone called the office asking about her? Had she mentioned plans to drive Route 64? "I keep replaying our last conversation," he told Detective Walsh. She was helping with the filing, talking about some TV show she wanted to watch. Everything seemed completely normal. If she was scared of something, if someone was following her, she gave no indication. The investigation expanded beyond Elmwood Park as November became December. Detective Walsh contacted police departments throughout northern Illinois, sharing Rachel's photograph and description. Missing person bulletins were distributed to hospitals, shelters, and social service agencies. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit provided a preliminary profile, suggesting that Rachel's disappearance was likely not voluntary. Christmas came and went without answers. Margaret Dunham returned to Springfield to handle her teaching responsibilities, but Harold remained in Elmwood Park, maintaining a vigil that became part of the town's daily rhythm. He could be seen every morning at McDonald's, reading the Tribune, and waiting for his phone to ring. Every afternoon, he walked Route 64 between the payphone and mile marker 1R12, covering the same ground that had already been searched dozens of times. Lisa Cooper found it impossible to stay in their apartment. Every corner held memories of Rachel, the coffee mug she used every morning, the mystery novels stacked beside her bed, the small cactus on the windowsill that she watered with religious devotion. After New Year's, Lisa moved back with her parents in Arlington Heights, leaving the lease to expire and taking only a few personal belongings. The answering machine stayed plugged in until the very end. Lisa couldn't bring herself to erase Rachel's final message. Those 18 seconds of voice and static that had become the only remaining proof of what happened that Friday night. She made copies on multiple cassette tapes, storing them in different locations, afraid that the original might be damaged or lost. Technology was changing rapidly in 2001. Cell phones were becoming more common, caller ID was standard, and the internet was beginning to transform how information traveled. But these advances only highlighted how much the investigation lacked. Rachel's cell phone records showed no unusual activity. Her email account, checked through AOL, contained only routine correspondence with friends and family. The Cook County Sheriff's Department officially classified Rachel's case as a missing person investigation with suspected foul play. Detective Walsh compiled a file that eventually filled 3 thick binders: witness statement, photographs, forensic reports, and follow-up interviews that led to dead ends and false hopes. One lead seemed promising in March 2001. A construction worker claimed to have seen a woman matching Rachel's description at a truck stop in Indiana, 3 days after her disappearance. The woman had seemed disoriented, asking for directions to Chicago, but security footage from the truck stop showed a different woman entirely, and the lead evaporated. Another investigation thread focused on Rachel's co-workers and patients at the medical office. Had someone become obsessed with her? Had a patient developed inappropriate feelings? Detective Walsh interviewed dozens of people who had interacted with Rachel in the weeks before her disappearance, finding nothing but consistent descriptions of a professional, friendly, and careful young woman. The case received periodic media attention throughout 2001. Chicago Tribune reporter Michael Davidson wrote a comprehensive piece on the first anniversary of Rachel's disappearance. Interviewing family members and investigators, the article generated renewed interest and additional tips, but none led to breakthrough discoveries. Harold Dunham moved permanently to Elmwood Park in late 2001, renting a small apartment near the police station. He had retired early from the Postal Service, dedicating his days to keeping Rachel's case active. He organized annual memorial walks along Route 60, distributed updated missing person flyers, and maintained contact with every investigator who had worked on the case. "People ask me why I don't go home," Harold told Detective Walsh during one of their weekly meetings. "But Rachel is my home. Until I know what happened to her, this is where I need to be." Margaret visited every few months, but the vigil was taking its toll on their marriage. She wanted to grieve, to find some way to move forward with their lives. Harold wanted to search, to maintain hope, to believe that answers were still possible. The gap between their coping mechanisms grew wider with each passing season. Detective Walsh transferred to a different division in early 2002, but she continued following Rachel's case informally. Her replacement, Detective Frank Morrison, inherited the 3 binders and the weight of unsolved questions. Morrison was younger, more optimistic about new investigative technologies, but he quickly discovered that some mysteries resist even the most advanced tools. The Illinois State Police upgraded their missing person database in 2002, ensuring that Rachel's information would be accessible to law enforcement agencies nationwide. Her DNA profile was entered into CODS, the national database that could identify remains or connect evidence from other cases. Her dental records were digitized and shared with coroners throughout the Midwest, but Route 64 remained empty of answers. The payphone outside Jerry's Diner was removed in 2003, replaced by a small memorial plaque that read, "In memory of those who called for help and were not heard." Flowers appeared there regularly, left by people who had never met Rachel, but understood the universal fear of vanishing into silence. Jerry Hendricks retired in 2004. Selling the diner to a chain restaurant company that demolished it within 6 months. A Subway sandwich shop occupies the location now, its bright lights and cheerful employees serving a completely different purpose. But truck drivers who remember the old place still slow down when they pass, still think about the young woman who made her last phone call from a booth that no longer exists. By 2005, Rachel Dunham's disappearance had settled into the category of cold cases that local police departments carry like old wounds. The initial intensity had faded, replaced by periodic reviews and annual media reminders. New missing person cases demanded attention. Fresh mysteries required resources. But Rachel's file remained open, waiting for the phone call or discovery that might finally provide answers. Lisa Cooper married in 2003 and moved to Colorado, but she still called the Elmwood Park Police Department every November 10th, asking about new developments. Margaret Dunham returned to teaching, finding solace in shaping young minds and maintaining normal routines. Harold's vigil continued, though it became quieter, more personal, less public. The technology of memory was changing too. Rachel's case was one of the first to maintain an active presence on early internet forums dedicated to missing persons. Her photograph appeared on websites that connected family members and amateur investigators, generating discussions and theories from strangers around the world. But for all the attention, all the theories, all the technological advances, one fact remained constant. Rachel Dunham had vanished somewhere between a payphone and mile marker 112 on Route 64, leaving behind only her voice on an answering machine and questions that seemed to multiply with each passing year. The silence where answers should have been became its own kind of presence, heavy and persistent, changing the lives of everyone who had known Rachel and everyone who tried to find her. It was a silence that spoke of vulnerability, of how quickly the familiar could become unknown, of how a single phone call could mark the boundary between existence and mystery. And in that silence, time moved forward without resolution, carrying Rachel's story deeper into the territory of unsolved cases, where hope and despair learn to coexist, and where the search for truth becomes its own kind of faith. 22 years have a way of changing everything except the questions that matter most. By 2022, Elmwood Park looked different. Chain restaurants where local diners used to be, condominiums rising where cornfields once stretched, teenagers with smartphones walking past the memorial plaque that few of them understood. Harold Dunham was 73 now, his hair completely grey, his daily walks along Route 64 shorter, but no less determined. Margaret had passed away in 2018, never knowing what happened to their daughter, taking her quiet grief to a grave that sat next to an empty plot reserved for Rachel. The marriage had survived, barely, held together by shared loss, and the understanding that some kinds of love require accepting the unacceptable. Lisa Cooper Martinez lived in Denver now, with 2 teenage daughters who knew the story of Aunt Rachel, the woman who had vanished before they were born, but whose presence somehow lingered in their mother's careful attention to their whereabouts, her insistence on detailed check-ins, her way of listening to answering machine messages twice. The case file had grown to 5 binders, passed between detectives like a family heirloom nobody wanted but couldn't abandon. Detective Sarah Kim had inherited Rachel's case in 2019, the 5th investigator to carry the weight of those unanswered questions. She was 32, methodical, and possessed of the kind of stubborn curiosity that made good detectives and insufferable dinner guests. Technology had transformed investigative work beyond recognition since 2000. DNA analysis that once took weeks now required days. Cell phone tracking that had been primitive now reached into every corner of daily life. Social media created digital footprints that made disappearing nearly impossible. But all these advances only emphasized how completely Rachel had vanished from a world that was becoming harder to escape. Detective Kim had spent months digitizing the case file, scanning photographs and witness statements into searchable databases, cross-referencing every detail with national missing person networks that hadn't existed in 2000. She had interviewed Harold Dunham extensively, walked Route 64 at different times of day, and studied traffic patterns that might explain why Rachel had ended up 12 miles from her usual route home. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. Danny Morrison, no relation to former Detective Frank Morrison, was a 28-year-old podcaster who had discovered true crime through the same internet forums that had kept Rachel's case alive for 2 decades. His show, Signals in the Static, focused on cold cases involving technology, exploring how communication devices had failed or succeeded in preserving final moments. Danny had grown up in Arlington Heights, close enough to remember the missing person flyers that had appeared throughout Cook County in 2000. His interest in Rachel's case was both personal and professional. He remembered his mother checking the locks twice after Rachel's disappearance, remembered the way adults had spoken in hushed tones about the young woman who had vanished from a phone call. In March 2022, Danny contacted Lisa Cooper Martinez through Facebook, explaining his project and requesting permission to investigate Rachel's case for his podcast. Lisa was initially reluctant. She had spoken to reporters, investigators, and amateur detectives over the years, always hoping for new insights, but usually finding only renewed pain. But something about Danny's approach felt different. He wasn't looking for sensational details or conspiracy theories. He was interested in the technology, in understanding how a phone call could provide so much information and so few answers simultaneously. "I want to find the original answering machine tape," Danny told Lisa during their first phone conversation. "The actual cassette from that night. I know you made copies, but I'm wondering if modern audio analysis might reveal something that wasn't detectable in 2000. Lisa had kept the original tape in a safety deposit box for 22 years, along with other mementos of Rachel's life, her college diploma, a few pieces of jewelry, the small cactus that had somehow survived decades of care from people who weren't Rachel. She had never considered that the tape might hold secrets that time and technology could unlock. "I'll think about it," Lisa said, but she was already thinking about something else. Storage Unit 247 at U-Store in Arlington Heights, where she had kept Rachel's belongings for over 2 decades, paying the monthly fee like a subscription to memory itself. Lisa hadn't visited the storage unit in 5 years. Life had moved forward, marriage, children, career changes, the daily demands of existing in the present rather than the past. But Danny's call reminded her that some things wait patiently in climate-controlled spaces, preserved against time and weather, and the natural tendency to forget. On Saturday, April 16, 2022, Lisa drove to the storage facility with her 16-year-old daughter Emma, who had requested to come along. Emma had always been curious about the aunt she'd never met, the woman whose photograph sat on the mantel next to her grandparents, whose story had shaped her mother's protective instincts in ways she was only beginning to understand. Storage Unit 247 was a 10 by 10 space filled with careful organization. Plastic bins labeled in Lisa's neat handwriting, Rachel's clothes, books and papers, electronics, apartment items, everything clean, preserved, waiting for a return that would never come. Lisa opened the bin labeled electronics first, finding Rachel's old portable CD player, a small television, and the cordless phone from their apartment. Beneath these items, wrapped in bubble wrap and sealed in plastic bags, was Rachel's personal collection photo albums, journals, and a small wooden box that had belonged to her grandmother. "What's in there?" Emma asked, pointing to the wooden box. Lisa lifted it carefully. She had gone through Rachel's belongings methodically in 2001, cataloguing everything for the police investigation, but some items had felt too personal for official scrutiny. The wooden box had contained Rachel's private things, letters from college friends, a few pieces of jewelry, and items that seemed meaningful only to Rachel herself. Opening the box now felt like trespassing, but Lisa reminded herself that privacy belonged to the living. Inside, she found the expected items: a bracelet from high school, ticket stubs from movies and concerts, a small address book with careful handwriting. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was something Lisa didn't remember seeing before: a small cassette tape in a clear plastic case, with a handwritten label that read, "Messages, November 2000. "Mum," Emma said quietly. "Is that what I think it is?" Lisa held the tape up to the fluorescent lights of the storage unit. The label was in Rachel's handwriting, neat and precise, as always. But why would Rachel have made a tape of messages in November 2000? And why hadn't Lisa found this during the original investigation? "I don't understand," Lisa said, more to herself than to Emma. "The police went through everything. I went through everything. How did we miss this?" She examined the wooden box more carefully, running her fingers along the interior. The bottom felt slightly loose, and when she pressed on one corner, a small section shifted, revealing a hidden compartment barely large enough for the cassette tape. Rachel had hidden the tape deliberately. Lisa's hands were shaking as she carried the cassette to her car, Emma following in curious silence. The drive home felt surreal. 22 years of wandering, and now possibly the thing they had all been seeking was sitting in her passenger seat, wrapped in tissue paper and Rachel's careful secrecy. That evening, Lisa called Danny Morrison, then Detective Kim, then Harold Dunham. By Monday morning, the tape was in the hands of audio specialists at Northwestern University, where Dr. Jennifer Walshnow, relation to the original, Detective Walshnow, a digital forensics lab that analyzed sound evidence for law enforcement agencies throughout the Midwest. Dr. Walsh had worked on cases involving everything from ransom demands to covert recordings, but Rachel's hidden tape presented unique challenges. The cassette was 22 years old, stored in less than ideal conditions, and had been created using consumer-grade equipment from 2000. Modern analysis tools were sophisticated, but they couldn't create information that wasn't there. The lab's initial digitization revealed that the tape contained approximately 30 minutes of recorded material. Most of it appeared to be phone messages, the kind of recordings someone might make if they wanted to preserve important conversations or threats. But the audio quality was poor, with significant background noise and multiple layers of sound that would require careful separation and enhancement. Detective Kim obtained a court order for the analysis, ensuring that any evidence discovered would be admissible in legal proceeding. Harold Dunham drove up from Elmwood Park every day, sitting in the Northwestern parking lot, like a man waiting for surgery results, unable to stay away, but powerless to influence the outcome. On Thursday, April 21, 2022, Dr. Walsh called Detective Kim with preliminary results. "We've isolated several distinct recordings," Dr. Walsh reported, her voice professional but carrying an undercurrent of excitement. "Most appear to be phone conversations that Rachel recorded, probably using a device connected to her home phone line. The dates we can determine span from early November 2000, right up until the day she disappeared." "What kind of conversations?" Detective Kim asked. "That's where it gets interesting. Several are calls from an unknown male voice, someone who was clearly calling Rachel repeat. The conversations are ... concerning. Not overtly threatening, but definitely inappropriate. Someone who knew details about her daily routine, her work schedule, her personal life." Detective Kim felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with genuine progress. "Can you identify the voice?" "Not yet. But we're working on audio enhancement, and Detective ... there's something else. The last recording on the tape appears to be from November 10, 2000, the day Rachel disappeared. It's a phone conversation that happened several hours before her final call from Route 64. The conversation that would change everything had been hidden in Rachel's grandmother's wooden box for 22 years, waiting for technology and persistence to reveal its secrets. Whatever Rachel had discovered, whatever had frightened her enough to make that fatal trip to Route 64, was preserved in magnetic particles on a cassette tape that had survived decades in storage, carrying its secrets through seasons of searching and years of silence. As Dr. Walsh prepared to play the enhanced audio for Detective Kim, sunlight streamed through the laboratory windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like static, like the visual representation of all the voices and secrets that technology can capture, preserve, and eventually reveal. The past was about to speak, 22 years after it had fallen silent. The Northwestern University Audio Lab felt like a cathedral of technology, with soundproof walls and equipment that hummed with digital precision. Detective Kim sat across from Dr. Walsh, watching waveforms dance across computer monitors like visual representations of the past, speaking to the present. "We've cleaned up most of the background noise," Dr. Walsh explained, adjusting settings on her computer. "What you're about to hear are the final 3 recordings from Rachel's tape, dating from November 8th through November 10th, 2000. The quality isn't perfect, but it's remarkably clear considering the source material." Harold Dunham had driven up from Elmwood Park that morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and 22 years of questions. At 73, he moved more slowly than he once had, but his mind remained sharp, focused on this moment that might finally provide answers about his daughter's fate. Lisa Cooper Martinez had flown in from Denver, leaving her family for what might be the most important conversation of her life. She sat beside Harold, these two people bound together by loss and the shared weight of not knowing, finally approaching the moment when not knowing might end. Danny Morrison, the podcaster whose investigation had led to this discovery, sat quietly in the corner with his recording equipment. He had obtained permission to document this moment for his show, understanding that he was witnessing the potential resolution of a mystery that had haunted a community for over 2 decades. Dr. Walsh clicked on the first audio file. This recording is from November 8, 2000, 2 days before Rachel disappeared. The caller ID shows it came from the same disconnected pager line that called her multiple times that final evening. Static filled the room, then cleared to reveal Rachel's voice, younger and more uncertain than anyone remembered her sounding. "Hello." A male voice, carefully modulated, but carrying an undercurrent of familiarity that felt wrong. "Rachel, it's me again. I think we need to talk. I've told you, I don't know who this is. Please stop calling me. But you do know me, Rachel. We see each other every day. You smile at me. You say good morning. You just don't realize how much those moments mean to me. If I know you, then tell me your name." A pause. Background noise that sounded like office equipment. Phones ringing in the distance. "Names aren't important. What's important is that you understand how special you are. How much I notice the way you organize those files. The way you always refill the coffee pot. The way you stay late to help, even when you don't have to." Rachel's voice changed, becoming more focused, more alert. "You work at the medical office. I work everywhere you work, Rachel. I drive where you drive. I know your Tuesday morning routine at the Shell station. Your Sunday grocery shopping at Julaska. I know you like that blue sweater, because you wear it every Friday." The recording ended abruptly. Dr. Walsh looked up from her computer. The tape suggests Rachel hung up at that point. But there's more. The second file, dated November 9th, began with Rachel's voice, speaking to someone else. "Dr. Harrison, I need to talk to you about something. Someone's been calling me, someone who says they work at the office. Do we have any new employees? Anyone who's been acting strangely?" Dr. Harrison's voice, professional, but concerned. "No new hires since March. Rachel, what kind of calls?" "Someone who knows too much about my routine, personal things, where I shop, what I wear, when I work late. They called again last night. Have you contacted the police?" "I'm going to, but I wanted to check with you first. See if maybe it was a patient who developed some kind of ... fixation. I'll review our patient files, see if anyone stands out. But Rachel, if someone is threatening you, he's not threatening me exactly. It's more like ... like he's trying to convince me that we have some kind of relationship that doesn't exist. It's creepy, but not illegal. Document everything. Record the calls if you can. And Rachel, don't stay late by yourself anymore. Not until we figure this out." The second recording ended, leaving the room in silence. Lisa was crying quietly, hearing her roommate's voice discuss fears she had never shared. Decisions that might have saved her life if they had been made differently. Dr. Walsh prepared the final file. This is from November 10th, 2000. The timestamp suggests it was recorded around 7:30 p.m. About an hour before Rachel left work, and 2 hours before her final call from Route 64. The third recording began with the now familiar sound of Rachel's phone ringing. "Hello." The same male voice, but different, now urgent. agitated. Rachel, thank God I've been trying to reach you all day. I told you to stop calling me. I'm going to report this to the police. No, you don't understand. Something's happened. Something terrible. I tried to protect you, but now they know. Who knows what? You're not making sense. The people I work with, they found out about my feelings for you. They're saying I violated patient confidentiality, that I used medical records to learn about your personal life. They're going to fire me, maybe even press charges. Patient confidentiality. Are you a doctor? I work in medical records at the hospital. I've been transferring files between Riverside Medical and Chicago General for months. That's how I learned about you, about your life, your habits. I never meant for it to go this far. Rachel's voice became very quiet. You've been reading my medical files. I love you, Rachel. I know how that sounds, but it's true. When I saw your information, your photo in the employee directory that Dr. Harrison sent over, I felt this connection. I started paying attention when you came to the hospital for file transfers. You were always so professional, so kind. I've never been to Chicago General. Dr. Harrison handles all the hospital transfers himself. Silence on the recording. Then the male voice, different again, caught in his own lie. You have been there, Rachel. You just don't remember me. I'm forgettable, invisible, but I see you. Who are you? What's your real name? My name is Thomas Brennan. I work in the records department at Chicago General. And Rachel, I need to see you tonight. They're going to arrest me tomorrow morning. This is my last chance to explain everything, to make you understand that what I feel for you is real. I'm not meeting you anywhere. This conversation is over. Rachel, wait. If you don't come, if you don't let me explain, I'm going to have to take more serious measures. I know where you live. I know your routine. I know you drive home along Diversey, but sometimes you take Route 64 when traffic is heavy. Are you threatening? I'm telling you that I love you too much to let this end badly. Meet me at Jerry's Diner on Route 64 at 9:30 tonight. Come alone. Let me explain everything, and then I'll leave you alone forever. I'm calling the police right now. The payphone outside Jerry's Diner, Rachel, 9:30. If you don't come, I'll know you never cared about me at all. The line went dead. The recording continued for several more seconds, capturing Rachel's rapid breathing, the sound of her hanging up the phone, and then silence. Dr. Walsh stopped the playback. The room felt heavy with the weight of finally understanding, of questions that had lasted 22 years suddenly having answers that no one wanted to accept. Detective Kim was already reaching for her phone, calling the Cook County Records Department to research Thomas Brennan. Employment history at Chicago General Hospital. Background checks that should have been conducted decades ago. Harold Dunham sat perfectly still, processing the knowledge that his daughter had been stalked by someone who used her medical information to build an obsession. Someone who had manipulated her into that fatal trip to Route 64 through a combination of lies and veiled threats. Lisa finally spoke, her voice thick with grief and anger. She went because she was scared. She thought if she didn't meet him, he would escalate. She was trying to handle it herself, trying to make it stop. Danny Morrison was writing furiously in his notebook, documenting not just the facts, but the emotions in the room, the way truth felt when it finally emerged from decades of silence. This was more than a podcast episode. Now this was the moment when a family finally learned how their daughter had died, and why. The investigation that followed moved with the efficiency of modern law enforcement, guided by specific information. Thomas Brennan had indeed worked at Chicago General Hospital in 2000, in the medical records department, with access to patient files transferred from dozens of suburban medical offices, including Riverside Medical Associates. His employment had ended abruptly on November 13, 2000, 3 days after Rachel's disappearance. The official reason was listed as violation of patient privacy protocols, but no criminal charges had been filed. In 2000, stalking laws were less comprehensive, digital privacy protections were minimal, and the connection between Brennan's dismissal and Rachel's disappearance had never been made. Thomas Brennan had moved to Arizona in 2001, worked a series of jobs in non-medical fields, and died in a car accident in Phoenix in 2019. He had never married, never been arrested for stalking or harassment, and had apparently lived a quiet, unremarkable life after leaving Illinois. The car accident that killed Brennan was single vehicle, late at night, on a deserted stretch of highway outside Phoenix. Police had found no evidence of mechanical failure or external factors. The official cause was listed as driver error, possibly related to falling asleep at the wheel. But among Brennan's possessions, found in a storage unit in Tempe, Arizona, investigators discovered items that would provide the final pieces of Rachel's story. Detailed maps of Elmwood Park, with Rachel's apartment and workplace, marked photographs taken from a distance, showing Rachel walking to her car, and a journal that documented his obsession with meticulous, disturbing precision. The journal entries from November 2000 revealed Brennan's escalating desperation as his employment situation deteriorated and his fantasies about Rachel became more elaborate. The final entry, dated November 10, 2000, provided the conclusion that Rachel's family had sought for 22 years, called Rachel Tonight. Told her to meet me at Jerry's diner. She's scared, but she has to come. If she doesn't, I'll have to visit her apartment. Make her understand that we belong together. She realizes eventually that I'm the only one who truly sees her, truly appreciates her kindness. After tonight, everything will be different. There was no entry for November 11th, no record of what happened at Jerry's diner, no description of the encounter that ended with Rachel's Toyota abandoned on Route 64 and Rachel herself vanishing forever. But investigators found something else in Brennan's storage unit, a small plastic bag containing a driver's license, a medical assistant certification card, and a silver bracelet engraved with the name Rachel. Items that could only have come from Rachel's purse. Items that proved Brennan had indeed met her that night, had taken these mementos of an encounter that cost Rachel her life. DNA analysis of the items revealed traces of Brennan's genetic material, confirming physical contact, but the location of Rachel's remains, the exact circumstances of her death. The details of those final moments, these secrets, had died with Thomas Brennan on a dark highway in Arizona, taking Rachel's complete story with him into silence. Detective Kim closed the case file on June 15, 2022, marking it as solved by exceptional means, the designation used when investigators know what happened but cannot pursue prosecution because the perpetrator is deceased. It was a resolution that answered the essential questions while leaving others forever unanswered. Harold Dunham returned to Elmwood Park with something he had never expected to possess: certainty. He knew what had happened to his daughter, knew that she had died not through random violence or personal carelessness, but because someone had used her medical information to build an obsession that ultimately destroyed both their lives. The memorial plaque on Route 64 was updated to include Rachel's full name and dates, acknowledging her not as a missing person, but as a victim of a crime that had finally been solved. Flowers still appear there regularly, left by people who understand that some stories end not with justice, but with truth, and that truth itself can be a form of resolution. Lisa Cooper Martinez returned to Denver with the knowledge that her roommate had been trying to protect herself, had been documenting threats and planning to involve police, had been taking reasonable precautions that unfortunately weren't enough against someone willing to exploit professional access to personal information. Danny Morrison's podcast episode about Rachel's case was downloaded over 2 million times, becoming part of a national conversation about digital privacy, workplace security, and the ways that technology can be used to enable stalking and harassment. The story that began with a phone call ending in static became a cautionary tale about trust, privacy, and the invisible vulnerabilities that connect us all. But for Harold Dunham, walking his daily route along Route 64, the resolution felt both complete and partial. He knew how Rachel's story ended, but he would never know her final thoughts, her last words, the details of courage or fear that marked her transition from missing person to memory. In the end, the silence spoke louder than any confession could have, carrying the weight of all the conversations that would never happen, all the years that would never be lived, all the love that would persist without an object, but with a story that was finally, truthfully, complete. The courtroom at the Cook County Courthouse was unusually quiet on the morning of September 23, 2022, when Judge Patricia Reynolds officially declared the Rachel Dunham case closed. No defendant sat at the accused table. No jury deliberated evidence. Instead, family members, investigators, and community members gathered to witness the formal conclusion of a mystery that had persisted for nearly 23 years. Detective Kim presented the final report to the court, a document that transformed 22 years of questions into a narrative, with beginning, middle, and end. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas Brennan's recorded voice on Rachel's hidden tape, his possession of her personal items, his documented obsession detailed in journals and photographs, and his access to the medical records that had enabled his stalking. While we cannot prosecute the deceased, Judge Reynolds stated, reading from her prepared remarks, the evidence clearly establishes that Thomas Michael Brennan was responsible for the disappearance and presumed death of Rachel Marie Dunham on November 10, 2000. This case is hereby classified as solved and closed. Harold Dunham sat in the front row, wearing the same dark suit he had worn to his wife's funeral 4 years earlier. At 73, he carried himself with the dignity of someone who had survived the worst possible uncertainty and emerged with something approaching peace. The answers hadn't brought Rachel back, but they had provided something almost as valuable, the ability to understand her story completely. Lisa Cooper Martinez held her 16-year-old daughter Emma's hand as the judge spoke, feeling the weight of 22 years lifting from her shoulders. The guilt she had carried, wondering if she should have done something differently that Friday night, questioning whether she had missed warning signs, finally dissipated in the face of clear evidence that Rachel had been protecting herself as best she could against a threat she couldn't have anticipated. Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Northwestern University had submitted a technical report detailing how the audio analysis had been conducted, ensuring that future cold cases might benefit from the same technological approaches that had unlocked Rachel's secrets. The hidden cassette tape, now catalogued as evidence, represented both the end of one investigation and the potential beginning of others. Danny Morrison's podcast series about Rachel's case had evolved beyond true crime entertainment into something more significant, an examination of how personal information becomes vulnerable in professional settings, how stalking behaviors escalate when enabled by institutional access, and how technology can both facilitate crime and eventually solve it. The series had been downloaded over 5 million times across all episodes, generating discussions in medical offices, hospitals, and corporate environments about privacy protocols and employee screening. Rachel's story had become a case study in multiple fields: law enforcement training, medical ethics courses, and digital privacy seminars. But for the people who had known Rachel personally, the resolution felt both definitive and incomplete. They knew what had happened, but they would never know her final moments, her last thoughts, or whether she had suffered. Some kinds of closure come with clean edges. Others arrive with rough borders that never quite heal. Harold decided to remain in Elmwood Park permanently. His small apartment near the police station had become home in ways that Springfield never could again. He had built relationships with investigators, community members, and other families dealing with missing person cases. His role had evolved from grieving father to informal advisor, helping other families navigate the bureaucracy and emotional challenges of unsolved disappearances. People ask me if I have closure now, Harold told a reporter from the Chicago Tribune during an interview 6 months after the case was resolved. I tell them I have something better than closure. I have Rachel's complete story. I know she was brave, that she was trying to protect herself, that she documented evidence even when she was scared. I know she didn't disappear because of anything she did wrong. That's not closure. That's justice of a different kind. The memorial plaque on Route 64 became an unexpected pilgrimage site for people dealing with similar losses. Families of missing persons left flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes describing their own searches for answers. The site evolved into an informal support network, connecting people who understood the specific grief of not knowing. Lisa established the Rachel Dunham Foundation in 2023, focusing on 2 primary missions: improving privacy protections for medical information and supporting families of missing persons during long-term investigations. The foundation worked with healthcare institutions to develop better screening procedures for employees with access to patient information and provided grants for advanced forensic analysis in cold cases. The foundation's first major initiative was funding audio analysis equipment for police departments throughout Illinois, ensuring that other hidden evidence might be discovered and analyzed using the same techniques that had finally solved Rachel's case. Technology that had taken 22 years to develop and apply to Rachel's mystery could now be deployed immediately for new cases. Emma Cooper Martinez wrote her senior thesis about her mother's roommate, examining how missing person cases affect extended communities and how technology changes the nature of both crime and investigation. The paper, titled Voices in the Static: How Audio Evidence Transforms Cold Case Resolution, won the Colorado High School Research Award, and was later published in a criminology journal. I never met Aunt Rachel, Emma wrote in her conclusion, but her story shaped my understanding of vulnerability, persistence, and the ways that truth can survive, even when people cannot. Her voice on that cassette tape waited 22 years to tell its story. That kind of patience gives me hope that other stories are waiting to be heard. Other mysteries are waiting to be solved. Other families are waiting to understand. Dr. Harrison from Riverside Medical Associates retired in 2021, but he had followed Rachel's case throughout his remaining years of practice. The resolution vindicated his instincts about the threatening calls Rachel had received and his advice that she document everything. Medical offices nationwide now include training about recognizing and reporting suspicious behavior from colleagues who might have inappropriate access to patient information. The Northwestern University Audio Lab created the Rachel Dunham Digital Forensics Archive, a repository of techniques and equipment specifically designed for analyzing degraded audio evidence in cold cases. Dr. Walsh continued developing methods for extracting information from damaged recordings, helping law enforcement agencies throughout the Midwest solve cases that had seemed technically impossible to resolve. Jerry Hendricks, the former night manager of the demolished diner where Rachel made her final phone call, was interviewed for Danny Morrison's podcast follow-up series. Now in his 70s and living in a retirement community in Florida, Jerry still remembered that November night clearly. "I think about her sometimes," Jerry said during the recorded interview. "Young woman, scared, calling for help from that payphone outside my place. If I had known, if I had paid more attention, maybe I could have helped. But you can't see into the future. Can't know which moments are going to matter forever." The payphone itself, long since removed, became symbolic of an era when communication was more limited, but perhaps more intentional. Rachel's final call represented both the constraints and the possibilities of early 2000. Technology, limited in its ability to pinpoint locations or preserve evidence, but capable of creating the recording that would eventually solve her case. Route 64 remained largely unchanged, a stretch of Illinois highway that carried commuters and travelers between familiar destinations. But for people who knew Rachel's story, mile marker 112 marked something different, the place where one mystery ended and another kind of understanding began. Traffic studies conducted after the case resolution showed that drivers frequently slowed near the memorial site, not because of mechanical problems or navigation confusion, but because the story had entered local consciousness in ways that changed how people experienced that particular stretch of road. Cell phone service providers reported occasional signal anomalies near mile marker 112, though technical analysis revealed no equipment problems or environmental factors that might cause interference. Local folklore suggested that Rachel's final call had somehow imprinted itself on the electromagnetic spectrum, creating echoes that sensitive equipment could detect. Detective Kim transferred to the FBI's Cold Case Unit in 2023, carrying expertise gained from Rachel's investigation into a national role solving similar cases. She maintained contact with Harold Dunham, updating him on other families who had found answers through persistent investigation and technological advancement. "Rachel's case taught me that evidence can wait," Detective Kim explained during a law enforcement training seminar. "Information that seems meaningless in one technological era can become crucial in another." The cassette tape that sat in storage for 22 years contained the solution to the mystery. We just needed the right tools and the right perspective to understand what it was telling us. The Chicago Tribune published a comprehensive retrospective on Rachel's case in November 2023, marking the 23rd anniversary of her disappearance. The article traced the investigation from the initial search through the technological breakthrough that provided resolution, emphasizing how persistence, community support, and advancing forensic capability had combined to answer questions that once seemed unanswerable. Local television stations produced documentary segments about the case, but these felt different from typical true crime programming. Rachel's story had become less about sensation and more about process, how investigations persist across decades, how families maintain hope without certainty, how communities respond to inexplicable loss. The story resonated particularly strongly with young women who recognized themselves in Rachel's careful routine, her professional dedication, her trust in systems that should have protected her privacy. Her case became part of broader conversations about workplace safety, digital privacy, and the ways that institutional access could be weaponized by individuals with harmful intention. Harold's daily walks along Route 64 continued, but they had changed character. Instead of searching for clues or maintaining a vigil, he walked for exercise, for meditation, for the simple pleasure of movement through landscapes that no longer held mysteries. Other walkers joined him, occasionally people who had followed Rachel's story, families dealing with their own losses, community members who found meaning in memorial routines. On November 10, 2023, exactly 23 years after Rachel's disappearance, Harold organized the final official memorial walk. Dozens of people participated, walking the route from Jerry's former diner location to mile marker 112, carrying flowers and photographs and the quiet satisfaction of a story that had finally reached its conclusion. "This is the last organized walk," Harold announced to the gathered participants. "Rachel's story is complete now. She doesn't need us to keep searching for her anymore. She needs us to remember her life, not just her disappearance." The memorial plaque remained, but its meaning had evolved. Instead of marking an unsolved mystery, it commemorated a resolved case that had taken nearly a quarter-century to understand. The inscription was updated one final time. Rachel Marie Dunham, 1975-2000. Her voice was finally heard. As seasons changed and years passed, Rachel's story settled into local history alongside other significant events that had shaped the community. Children learned about her case in school projects about local history. College students studied her investigation in criminal justice courses. Medical professionals referenced her case in privacy training seminars. But perhaps most importantly, her story became part of the broader narrative about persistence, about how some kinds of truth require decades to emerge, about how technology and human determination can eventually illuminate even the darkest mysteries. Lisa Cooper Martinez visited Elmwood Park every November 10th, bringing her daughters to see the memorial plaque and understand the story that had shaped their mother's life. These visits felt less like grief pilgrimages and more like historical education, teaching her children about courage, perseverance, and the ways that love persists even after its object is gone. "Your Aunt Rachel was brave," Lisa would tell her daughters each year. "She tried to protect herself. She documented evidence. She made choices that seemed right at the time." Her story reminds us that we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond, how we prepare, how we help each other. The last entry in the official case file was made by Detective Kim on December 31, 2023, 3 years after Rachel's disappearance was finally explained. Case closed with resolution. Family informed, community informed, lessons learned and documented for future investigation. Rachel Dunham's voice was preserved in static for 22 years, waiting for technology and persistence to decode its message. Sometimes the echo is more powerful than the original call. In the end, Rachel's story became less about how someone disappears and more about how truth emerges. Her voice, captured on magnetic tape and hidden in a wooden box, had waited patiently through decades of searching, through technological advancement, through the dedication of people who refused to accept that some questions could never be answered. The static had finally cleared. The message had been received. And Rachel Dunham, missing for 23 years, had finally come home, not in person, but in story, in understanding, in the complete and certain knowledge of what had happened on that November night when a phone call ended in electronic screams, and a young woman vanished into silence that would eventually learn to speak. Sometimes, truth survives only in the memories of those who still wait. But sometimes, truth survives in the technology of its time, preserved against forgetting, waiting for the right moment to echo across the years, and finally, definitively, break the silence.